So the first thing that I would like to see is missions. I am not overly against the idea of having standing on circles. And I'm not overly against the idea of secondary objectives. But for me personally, after doing that for a few years, I think I would prefer for a game of Warhammer 40k to feel like it is attempting to simulate a battle rather than it being a series of conditions that I need to fulfill to win a game. So I would quite like to have objectives, but I think I would like to go back to objectives that are scored towards the end of the game, not necessarily objectives that are scored throughout the game. I think that there should be accommodation for both, though. So there should be some missions which are scored throughout, cumulative scoring, and there should be some missions where they're scored at the end. So an example of this would be, maybe there is 3 strategic locations across the middle of the board. Those strategic locations should be represented accurately. Maybe you've got something like the hill, a hill for high ground. Maybe something like a weapons cache or something. But there should be 3 strategic locations across the board. Whoever holds the majority of those strategic locations at the end of the game should win. If they are equally contested, if there's an equal amount or they're contested, it's a draw. Something as simple as that. Now, the way I would encourage those missions is, I think I would have it where only battle line units can hold them. So even if you take a pure power army and you bulldoze through your opponent, and even if you table them, because you didn't bring any battle line, you can't physically control the objectives. You might think that's a bit stupid, and this is like I said, it's something that's coming off the top of my head, and maybe the idea could be refined, but something like that. So we're trying to take, and the idea of the mission is we're trying to take these objectives and then be able to dig in with them, which is why things like battle line are so important, because battle line represent those units which are more likely to be able to dig in and like hold the ground. You know, let's say like a blade guard champion or a or like a terminator or something. They're more likely to be an asset which is brought into a mission, brought into a battle sector to do the damage, but the moment that battle is over, they're going to be withdrawn to go to another battle sector. Whereas something like your intercessors, your tactical marines, something like your guardsmen, all that kind of stuff, they're going to be left behind to like hold the ground. So that's how you can sort of narratively justify it. Or, well, if I've tabled the entire opponent, surely I control the objectives. Well, no, because if your entire army is made up of assets which are designed to be on the attack, then they're going to have to be withdrawn and sent somewhere else. So you might have cleared the enemy away, but when your rapid response force moves away, the enemy could reoccupy those positions. So it ends up being a draw because no one holds the objectives. You know, you've battered the enemy, so well done, but you haven't got the assets in your list that are designed for holding the ground. This also potentially opens up an interesting argument, because you could have people who go, okay, but what about if I just take the bare minimum amount of battle line to try and then hold the objectives? And I'd be like, okay, yeah, you could absolutely do that. It's a risk though, because what if your opponent goes, well, I'm going down, but I'm going to take you with me, and they put all their effort into killing your ship munchers. And if they do that, then you're like... So it encourages players to in my mind, and I could be wrong about this, but it kind of encourages players to bring some redundancy. Because if anything can hold an objective, then there's no incentive to bring things like battle line. You just bring the most killy stuff, and then that killy stuff can do the job of killing everything and still holding the objectives. But if the only way to score at the end of the game is to have stuff in your army that is, like battle line that can do it, then it encourages, I feel, it encourages a slightly different gameplay. If we look back on Warhammer 40k, we've never had that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've ever had that. As far as I can cast my mind back, we have had missions where anything can control the objectives. At least throughout, let's say from 8th edition onwards, we've had rules like objective secured, which meant that anything could hold it, but if you've got objective secured, let's say if you've got an objective secured unit and the enemy hasn't got an objective secured unit, then even if you're both on it, you win because you've got objective secured. And then if both sides have got objective secured on the objective, it then comes down to number of models. Now, how I would change that is you change it to you should take into account something like how Old World does it, where you should have unit strength. So Swords and Smith has made a really good point here, where it's like, okay, but that can be difficult to balance between factions, because some factions, if we just take it down to the number of models, some factions can just spam models, whereas other factions, can't. So if I've got, let's say, I've got guards, I've got 10 guardsmen. My 10 guardsmen are half the price of your 10 Plague Marines, if not less. So that's unfair on you. So having something like unit strength, or maybe this is where objective control comes in or something, but I think having something like unit strength could lean into it, and maybe that comes down to the number of wounds. So if I've got 10 guardsmen, my unit strength is 10. If I've got 5 Plague Marines, my unit strength is 10. Because the Plague Marines have got 2 wounds each, and the Guardsmen have got 1 wound each. So the Plague, and then that could take into account wounds as well. So if you've got 3 Plague Marines, but one of them is wounded, your unit strength isn't 6, your unit strength is 5. So it's like number of wounds from battle line, which is on the objective. And so that way and I think Poxwalkers should of course be battle line as well. It's stupid that they're not. But you could even have it, maybe it's not even unit strength, maybe it could be type of infantry. So you have light infantry and heavy infantry. Maybe heavy infantry, like Plague Marines, when it comes to the working out, if it's contested by 2 battle line units, maybe there being a difference between light, medium, and heavy infantry can also determine how likely you are to hold that objective. If you've got 1 Plague Marine and I've got 1 Guardsman, then you should hold it, even if your Plague Marine's on 1 wound, because he's a heavy infantry. He's more like, he's a bigger deal than my 1 Guardsman. So there's an element. Do you see what I mean? There's a bit of a this is not a perfect system. I'm coming up with this literally off the top of my head, having never thought about this before until right now. Hand on heart, this is all coming to me right now. I'm sure you could point out many flaws with it, but the point is, we've got missions which flow very quickly because we're not having to tot up points constantly, and we're not having to draw cards which then completely change what we might do from one to the other. We're not trying to do objectives which might contradict each other or anything like that. We've got the mission, we can engage with that mission, and we've got mechanics that can be conducive to other. We've got mechanics that can accommodate other, that accommodate the different factions, and can try and make it, so that 5, Plague Marines aren't always going to get outdone by 10 Guardsmen. That it's more equals pequals than that. So that's one example of one way I would do the missions. I actually don't necessarily have an issue with cumulative scoring missions as well. But, you know, I think the way that it could be done is to represent your maybe you have the same thing. There's 3 missions across the board. And rather than it just being, here are 3 arbitrary circles that you are standing on, have a bit of effort put into what those circles mean. So maybe those circles aren't just arbitrary circles. Maybe they represent fuel dumps, ammo bunkers, data terminals. And the idea is that your guys are trying to extract resources from those terminals whilst they're in control of those objectives. At the moment, there's no real flavor around why we stand on these circles. I'd be much more conducive to the idea of standing on a circle if in my mind, in my imagery, it's not just, oh, well, we're here, guys, we got 5 archery points. It's the guys running in, like grabbing boxes of ammo and like, get these out, get these out, get these out, get these to the truck, get these to the truck, go, 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 go. You know, go, lads, move. Like, we've got to get this fucking stuff out here. Or there's there's like a guard squad that like runs into, or like a squad of Kazakin. They break in, the objective's in like a ruin. They break into the ruin, they sweep the area. They see the data terminal and the sergeant runs up to it and he goes, we've got to wipe this data core. Or we've got to extract as much data from this terminal as possible. There's some very important information here. By the way, Cheers Avenger, I'm going to wank you off in just a moment. Thank you for the big support. You know, they run in, they type, and that's what it represents, them extracting important satellite information or some hidden intelligence or something. The longer that you control in that objective, the reason you're getting more points from it is because you are doing something. You're not just standing on a circle. So I think you can have the cumulative scoring. But again, I feel like you've got the missions. And the missions, you've got the primary mission. And you should have a focus on why you're doing that primary mission. Now, then we come to secondary missions. I much preferred it when primary missions and secondary missions were separated. When we had standard missions and we had Maelstrom of War. I think that I would consider returning to that format. The idea of you have a goal, so that there's 2 kinds of missions which can satisfy 2 kinds of gameplay. The kind of gameplay where there's a mission in front of you. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is this. Think about the film 1917. The 2 soldiers go into the bunker, they're given the mission by the commander, and then they have to go and do that mission. And they've got one goal. So that's the first kind of mission we talked about. The second kind of mission, where you're pulling secondaries and things are changing constantly, that should be separate. Because that allows you, for those of you that want to have a crazy game where you're like, yeah, let's pull some cards, let's see what happens. You keep it fresh, you never know what's going to happen. I think that's... I don't necessarily want those 2 things to mix. So my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k would have primary missions where you can come up with a plan and enact a plan, and those primary missions can consist of objectives that are won at the end of the game, but the only way you win those objectives at the end of the game is by having the right units, and then there's extra mechanics in there which help you which help balance out factions. You haven't just got one person, guardsmen just like overwhelming objectives with like 2 or 3 blokes, and 2 or 3 guardsmen being worth the same as 2 or 3 plague marines. Okay, so that's that one. And then I think you have secondary missions which allow you to go nuts and maelstrom and all this kind of stuff. All right. Now, another mission that I think should make a return, controversial, is I think we should... There's going to be some people that just want to fucking kill things. So I think we should take a leaf out of Old World's book. And I think that we should have a mission where you kill stuff, but it's not you kill a unit, you get 1 point. It's you kill a unit and you get that unit's points value. Now, we have had issues we've had with this style with 40k in the past is that what people do is they just take one absolute mega unit, and if you don't kill it, then you don't get any victory points. This is something that we have seen happen on occasion in Old World. So we'll just take like a massive brick. Now, it is a little bit of a risk to do that in a game like Old World, because if the unit breaks, which it can break, and runs away, you lose everything. So I do think that this will bring me on to my next point, but I think there's a few ways you can manage that. Firstly, that you could have it where a unit can only have a maximum points cost, including attached characters. So you could have something like you can't have more than 500 points in one character. This is something that we saw in... This is something that's actually been introduced in Old World now. You can't spend more than 500 points on a single character. So having something similar to that in 40k, I think, would be great. It doesn't have to be 500 points, but whatever metric makes sense for the points level and the units that we have available and all this kind of... I don't think there's many individual units that actually cost over 500 points now. Not even Baneblades do. Most Imperial Knights don't. Most Primarchs don't. So I think 500 points could make sense. But I think you have to have this... You get points for the units that you kill worth on its points value. I think you have to do that, but you have to combine it with the way Old World builds its lists. So if my per edition of Warhammer 40k list building would be the way that Old World does list building, where you have restrictions on units, where there is 0 to 3 per so many points. You could just have the rule of 3. I'm fine with the rule of 3. I have no issue with the rule of 3. I like the rule of 3. It's okay. I think it's been something that started in 8th edition, and I've never had an issue with it. So if you wanted to stick with the rule of 3, that's fine. But I think we should have it where there's not a force organization chart where you're having to plug things in, but there's percentages. So 25% of your army must be battle line. However you slice it, in whatever capacity you want, 25% of your army must be battle line. This avoids the problems that we've had in the past with, because people say, bring the force org chart back, bring the force. No, the problem with the force org chart is, I mean, maybe it wouldn't be the issue with the missions that I've sort of outlined, but the problem with the force org chart in the past, traditionally, has been that people just took 2 minimum units. Now, that might not be such a problem if we have our aforementioned battle line can only do primary objectives kind of thing, but the points, let's belt some braces this. Let's nail it down. So let's have percentages so people can bring MSU if they want to. We're not going to stop them. We're not stopping them in that way. But also there's a limit on how much you can spend in one area. Bring back things like, I mean, the way Old World does it is you've got characters, you've got core, you've got special, and you've got rare. And I think in Old World, you can spend up to 50% of your army on characters. You can spend as much of your army as you want on core, but you have to spend a minimum of 25%. You can spend up to 50% of your army on special, and you can spend up to 25% of your army on rare. Now, you'll notice that those percentages actually add up to more than 100%. That's because it's not meant to add up to 100%. It's meant to be if someone wants to put 25% into core and then 50% to special and then 25% to characters and then nothing with rare, that's fine. So it's not forcing you to take rare or anything like that. But there's only, if you do choose to take rare, there's only a limit on how much you can take. So I think percentages, bring in percentage-based force restrictions, because it keeps the freedom where people aren't trying to fill in slots, but it also adds, there are barriers. Now, what I like about Old World is that those percentages can change based on detachments. So if I take a Nuln army, for example, for my empire, what I can spend on like rare is it might not be the case with Nuln, but let's use Dawn as an example. I think it's more with White Wolves. But anyway, the point is, if I take, let's say I took Recon Detachment for Guard, maybe what I could spend on vehicles, the percentage I could spend on vehicles comes down, but the percentage I can spend on elite infantry goes up. So this is where you've got, this is where the percentage thing works. So not everyone's pigeonholed into one way. You bring in other, as the game develops, you bring in more detachments. Those detachments are flavorful because of the amount they can take, or the amount they're restricted by taking a certain thing. So you've got percentage restrictions, and you've got things like rule of 3 and stuff in there, and then those can move depending on what detachments you're in. So I would, my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k would borrow a lot of the force organization from Old World, but also add in a few restrictions, like you can't overspend on one unit, so that way you you can't abuse the whole, like, just putting 1,000 points into one character that can never be killed, that kind of thing. So that covers missions. That covers missions, and that covers force organization. And, you know, those are just some. I've not covered every mission that I'd want. I've covered some of the missions that I'd want, and I've covered roughly how I'd want forces to work. I want to talk about factions in a moment, but the first thing I want to talk about, but before then, the first thing I want to talk about, well, the third thing I want to talk about is morale. I think morale needs to come back right now, and I would say ever since 8th, for the longest time that I can remember, morale has been a joke in Warhammer 40k. Even going back to the old days. In editions like, in old Hammer editions, there was just too many units which had Fearless, so they never cared about morale. And then since 8th edition onwards, morale has just become increasingly watered down in terms of its crunchiness. I would bring morale back in a really big way, because at the end of the day, historically, armies have suffered incredibly during a rout rather than during the battle. And this isn't just something that's taken place in ancient times. It's something that's taken place in modern times as well. So an example of this taking place in, like, ancient times is often you would have, like, when you hear these battles of, like, the Roman legions versus, like, the Gauls, the reason why the Roman legions would take, like, 1,000 casualties and the Gauls would take, like, 20, 30, 40,000 casualties is not because the Romans just kept killing all the fucking Gauls. It's because during the battle, both sides were kind of stabbing each other the same amount. But, you know, you've got shields and armor, so both sides are stabbing each other relatively the same amount. But the Romans wouldn't break. They wouldn't break. They were extremely disciplined, so they wouldn't break. So eventually, the enemy army gets very... and they also were pretty professional soldiers as well. So they had a lot of stamina, whereas if you're just someone that does it because you're a man and it's your part-time job, and, you know, everyone gets called up to fight, but you don't really have the same stamina. That's because you're not trained for that stamina. You just got natural stamina for the day. You just get tired. Eventually, you break, and then your shield wall breaks, and then the enemy gets in amongst you, and they just start twatting you. So it's when they broke is when the mass casualties occurred. And so I feel like that should... and then you see that in modern times. This might be a little controversial to bring up, but I think it was during the first Gulf War, you had the Highway of Death, when the Iraqi armed forces were streaming down this highway, basically in a mass retreat. It was a mass retreat, and they were streaming down this highway, and then the Americans just did, well, NATO forces in general, just did strafing runs. It's where the A-10 gets its reputation from. And the reason the reason they were able to do those is because the Iraqi forces were essentially broken. No one was really doing air defense or anything. Everyone was just trying to get the fuck out of there. So that's where mass casualties go. So it's not just something that happens in ancient battles, it's something that can happen in very much modern battlefields as well. So it's a mechanic that is relevant to a sci-fi game. People say, oh, well, the morale system in Old World isn't really relevant to 40k. It's incredibly relevant. At the end of the day, battles are won and lost when someone really decides to give up. So I think I would probably, I would lend a little bit from Old World. I think I would lend a little bit from Old World, because Old World has the morale quite right. Units in Old World will fall back in good order. There's a whole mechanic where if you lose a combat, you fall back in good order. And then, so what that means is you fall back 2d6, picking the highest, and then you automatically regroup. Essentially, you've not broken, but you've had to fall back. You also have, if you lose a combat but only by like a little bit, you'll give ground, where you just get pushed back like 2 inches. Now that applies to melee, and I think that should apply to 40k as well. I think the way you do it is you have units falling back towards the nearest board edge. Because obviously 40k units are much more skirmish based, so it's harder to determine where. Just fall back towards the nearest board edge. You've fallen back towards the board edge. Maybe you can have a mechanic where some units, naturally you fall back towards the board edge, but maybe units like commissars, captains, synapse creatures, bosses, all this kind of stuff, instead of falling back towards the board edge, you can choose to fall back towards the nearest one of these morale-based leaders. So that way you can manage the risk of falling back off the board and losing your whole unit. Okay. Now in Old World, they do actually have a mechanic for how you fall back. If you lose a combat massively, by the way, you just break, and you break, and the enemy might just run you down. Now I would take all that, and I would do this with the way Old World does shooting as well, because how Old World does shooting morale is if you take 25% casualties from shooting, you have to do a panic test. However, if you are above half strength, then if you fail that panic test, you don't break off the board, you just fall back. So that's 2d6 picking the highest. So, and then you automatically rally, and then in your turn, your unit can act normally. So the idea is maybe your guardsmen are holding an objective, a storm of fire comes in, your 25-man strong platoon loses 10 guys, you fail your leadership, and you fall back towards 2d6 towards the nearest morale officer. Let's say you can fall past morale officers, you just can go in that direction. And then they automatically rally, and then it comes over to your turn. You've got a chance to try and retake that objective, but because you've fallen back off that objective, maybe you can no longer gather the data from it. See what I mean? You can still have morale and cumulative objectives. In fact, morale actually becomes very important for cumulative objectives. Battle shock then becomes really important. Let's say you've got a unit like because right now battle shock doesn't do anything, does it? Battle shock doesn't do anything. If you hit me with a artillery team and my unit fails battle shock, I don't care, because then in my I can't use stratagems on it. Okay, fine, I don't give a shit. In my next turn, it's above half turn, so now it doesn't need to do battle shock. But imagine if in 10th edition right now, if you failed a battle shock test, you fell back 2d6 inches towards the nearest board edge. Imagine that. Because then, when it comes over to your turn, your unit might have fallen off the objective, and now you don't get your primary points. You see, I'm not against primary scoring. I'm not against... it's what I said at the very beginning. I'm not against the way 10th edition does missions. I don't like the mix of secondaries and primary. And I think that, you should have more ways of interacting with... I think those missions can work a lot better if morale actually ends up being a thing. So you could have units that there's abilities in Old World which just force you Even if you don't even have to take a test, you're just forced to give ground. You're just forced, like there's a spell called Wind Blast, which even if you take no casualties from the Wind Blast, you have to give ground. Now that way you could have, incredibly, you can have give ground just fall back 2 inches. You just move back 2 inches. So you could have it where you can like force people to automatically, give ground, but it's only 2 inches. Or you can have people who have a test, and if they fail it, then they give ground, so it could be more powerful. So that's how I would do morale. I think it would. You want morale to be punishing, but for it to, but units which are more cohesive, more, they're not. They're pretty high unit strength. They've not been battered. They should be able to get back in the fight relatively quickly. Whereas units which are down just the last couple of blokes should be thinking of getting out of there. Now, I think you might say, oh, but Space Marines don't, Space Marines know no fear. Okay, yeah, that's a great point. Space Marine. Why would a Space Marine, if a Space Marine unit gets reduced down from 10 blokes down to 8 blokes, and they fail their panic test, and they just start fleeing, what does that represent? Does that represent the Space Marines breaking and fleeing in panic? No. What that could very easily represent is the Space Marines getting the gene seed of their brothers and taking it off the battlefield. It could represent them dragging their fallen brothers off the battlefield because they're like, fuck, we can't just leave 8 dead dudes here. This is very valuable shit that our people have. We need to get that off. So you can easily have Space Marines flee without it representing them fleeing in blind terror. And you might be like, what about Tyranids? Well, this is where Synapse can come in. Synapse creatures could act as one of these morale officers that we've spoken about. Any Tyranid unit can voluntarily fall back towards a Synapse unit. You could even have units that are, even if they're not within Synapse, you could even, because they're instinctively, they're going to go towards the will of the hive mind. And then you could also have it where units that are within Synapse range, they only give ground. They don't fall back in good order. So this incentivizes you to kill the Tyranid Synapse creatures. Because right now there's no real incentive to kill Synapse creatures. But imagine if you killed the enemy Synapse creatures and then you started making the Tyranid, non-Synapse creatures take panic tests. Well, they're going to start falling back towards board edges rather than just giving ground. So that means that, and they're going to start falling back further as well. Because they're trying to get back into Synapse, or they're just trying to get away because their instinctive behavior is taken over. So it makes Synapse feel more like what Synapse should be. What about Orcs? Orcs, well, Orcs, when they're in range of, Orcs will fall back towards, Orcs could fall back towards war bosses and stuff, and knobs, because those are where they're gonna run back, and those creatures are going. Those are other units are going to start bashing them back into line. You could have something with like mob rule, where mob rule, because mob rule used to be a thing, where you could mob rule could be where if your unit, if Orcs are they could have higher tolerances to the whole. Maybe they take 50% casualties before they take a panic test. Because they're like, well, we've only lost 25% of the boys, so that's okay. But if they lose 50%, Orcs could become more insulated. So they could still fall back and stuff. Forward, but then they're less... Or maybe Orcs, if they're above a certain unit strength, they give ground rather than they fall back. There's ways that you could have Orcs... They could be really, really hard to break until there's hardly any of them left. And then they almost automatically break. Because they're really... As long as there's quite a few of them around, they're all right. But the moment there's hardly any of them, they're like... They're gone. And, killing things like... You don't have to have, like... Killing war bosses means all the Orcs shit themselves and run off. Killing a war boss just starts taking away the ability for the orc player to fall back towards that or to give ground towards that or something similar. You know, maybe if you have a knob inside a boy mob, they give ground rather than fall back. But if you this starts making precision mean more as well, because right now precision doesn't mean all that much. But if precision means something, then you can snipe the knobs out, and then the orcs are more likely to fall back further. There's lots of ways you can make morale much more impactful and have that effect, have morale impactful, but have it manageable. Because then there's an interesting game within a game where you're trying to break the enemy's morale by taking out their leaders, which means their army starts being more likely to fall back in ways your opponent doesn't want it to. And likewise, you are trying to preserve your morale so that your units fall back in ways that you want them to. It represents things like the chain of command. It represents things like you can have, you know, epic heroes be beacons that people rally to. There's all sorts of things you can do with it. There's all sorts of things you can do with it, and it becomes flavorful, impactful. It becomes flavorful, yet also impactful from a game mechanic point of view. So that's how my ideal morale situation would work. Influence for this is old world, but also influence for this is kind of like Company of Heroes, where you fall back to your base in Company of Heroes, but you can also set like the ambulance for the US in Company of Heroes 2, you can fall back to there. It's the Major, isn't it? It's the Major for the US in Company of Heroes 2, you can fall back to him. So that's kind of an influence as well. But I feel like it makes morale feel more like... It makes each faction's morale feel more appropriate for them. Commissars are going to keep the guards in line. Kill the commissars, they're going to run away. Knobs are going to keep the boys in line. Get rid of the knobs, the boys are going to stop running away. Synapse creatures are going to keep the the bugs in line. Get rid of the synapse creatures, they start falling back further. Space Marines are going to rally to their chaplains. Get rid of the chaplains, they start falling back further. You can apply that, Eldar. Eldar are going to fall back. Eldar are going to fall back to things like maybe their Farseers or their Warlocks. But if those seers go away, the Eldar are going to be like, well, we don't know what's going to fucking happen in the future here. We got to get the fuck out of here. I don't know if this Strand of Fate is even meant to be something we're engaging with anymore. We don't want to fuck with the Strands of Fate. Necrons, they're more likely, their programming is going to tell them to fall back more towards the Pharaons, who have the intelligence to be able to direct the battlefield. Dark Eldar are more likely to fall back towards, Kabalites towards their Kabalite leaders, Witches towards their witch leaders, Homunculus creatures are more likely to fall back towards their creators. When those things go away, the Dark Eldar are like, fuck this, we're out of there. You can apply this logic, this mechanic to many different armies, and it makes sense. It's immersive for why it's happening. What isn't immersive is you fail your battleship test, and now for some reason you can't receive Armor of Contempt. That's not really doing anything. Doesn't really matter. So you can't receive, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not enough. It's not impactful. It's just, that is a mechanic servicing a game, not a mechanic trying to emulate and represent something on the battlefield. And we've talked about, and the morale thing sort of led me on to how to factions as well. And I think the last thing my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k, truly I would, I think I would focus on really filling these gaps in. Obviously, a perfect edition of Warhammer 40k would see the abolishment of if we don't make models for it, we won't make rules for it. I think that's very stupid. I think it's counterproductive. I don't think it's actually whatever its aim. I don't think it's achieving it. If the goal of we don't make models for it, so we're not going to make rules for it, was effective, then Wargames Atlantic wouldn't exist. Games Workshop took away Mordians, Vestroyans, Praetorians, and all these other guard regiments, because they were like, well, we don't make rules for these, so they're going away. We make rules for Kriegers, Cadians, and Catachans because we still sell those things, and so on and so forth. Well, if that was an effective policy, if that was protecting their IP and protecting people from abusing their Warhammer 40k universe and everything, then Wargames Atlantic wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be able to exist. But Games Workshop stopped selling certain things, and all that happened is it left money on the table, and other companies came in and took that money. So Games Workshop not making rules for conscripts has had no impact. People still sell conscripts. Look at Wargames Atlantic cannon fodder. So it's an ineffective policy, which is causing quite a serious negative impact in the game. If your policy that you have, which isn't related to your game, is having a knock-on effect into your game, it's a bad policy. Honestly, you could come with all sorts of arguments and devil's advocates and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, I can still buy conscripts from other people. I can still buy veterans from other people. I can go and play games where conscripts exist, where veterans exist. I just can't buy them from you, Games Workshop, so I'll buy them from somebody else. So I would get rid of this. Policy, and instead I would, rather than focus on trying to constrict and control and grasp, I would focus on making the product the best possible product it could be, so that people are encouraged to buy my product because they can see it's a good product. Because all you do when you squeeze is piss people off. Yeah. And I think I would bring back quite a lot of generic. I'd bring back some generic units for all factions. I think that would, I'm speaking from a guard point of view, but there's lots of factions where this is relevant, and I would do quite a bit of consolidation as well. I think Emperor Children should have loads and loads of models. I don't think they should be their own separate faction. If they are their own separate faction, they should have access to the vast majority of the Chaos Space Marine range. I would bring all Chaos together. I'd bring all Chaos. I would have. Either you have it where Death Guard and Emperor Children and Thousand Sons and World Eaters can access much more of the Chaos Space Marine roster, and they're fully fledged separate factions, or we just bring them all back together. I don't mind which way you do it, but there's a lot of obvious holes in factions right now, and I don't think it's... I think it's true for the Guard, but I think it's true for many other factions as well. I think Games Workshop should... for Tau, for example, there should be an alien... We've talked about this before. There should be an alien auxiliary data sheet, and it should be a big data sheet. And it should start off as the baseline should basically be a guardsman with a pulse carbine. But then you can make him +1 toughness, but like -1 movement to represent something that's like something that's a bit, it's not humanoid. It's like tougher, but it's slower. I think you probably would need to bring back granular points. And truth be told, I think granular points should come back. I think granular points should come back. I do not like these summarized points that we have, and you might say that there's lots of reasons that granular points aren't a good thing, But at the end of the day, if I may be so bold, this is my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k, and I want granular points back. I like granular points. I very much enjoy building my list with them in Old World, and I very much enjoy building my list with them in Bolt Action, and I very much do not enjoy not having them in. So yeah, that would be my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k. Missions that feel like missions. Morale that is in missions that feel like you're trying to conduct an operation, not just service game mechanics. Morale that feels impactful and makes sense per faction. And I think reversing this policy, that this very limited and restricted policy that frankly I don't think has any positive gameplay impact whatsoever. And if all of those things, take all of those things that we've spoken about and add in the fantastic job that Games Workshop has done with the 3-month balance patches, I think you add those, but I think you keep those. Yes, it caused a lot of change, but it gives something for people to look forward to. It gives something for people to look forward to, and it gives people confidence that if something comes out and it's a bit fucked, it's okay, because we're not afraid to change the game. I was never worried about Death Guard. I was never worried about Imperial Knights, because even if they were butt-foot broken, I knew maximum would have to wait 3 months. And anyone can stomach anything for 3 months. I think that would be my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k. A combination of older mechanics, but without just blindly, chugging down the member berries, and new mechanics that we've never had before in any edition of 40k that I can remember. And still with an eye on balance. And I think still with an eye on balance. The people that want to power game the shit out of 40k can absolutely still do that. We're not trying to change that aspect of it. We're trying to make factions feel like they should. We're trying to make missions feel like they should. And we're trying to make morale feel like they should. So that would be how I would play Warhammer 40k, and that would be my perfect edition of Warhammer 40k. But Martin, in this edition of Mordian Streams, MG explains how he really wants to play one-page rules without realizing it. I have no idea. Maybe that is one-page rules. Maybe that is one-page rules. Yeah. Okay, now maybe it is. Who knows? But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, and because I'm doing go do this as a stream highlight, and let me know what would be your perfect edition of Warhammer 40k. And I wonder how many people just put 4th edition down in chat and in the comments. Oh, and I'd go back to 6th turn. Oh, 1 minute, I've forgotten something. Hold the horses. Terrain. I would bring back. I'd do a lot more with terrain. And I would really tone down the amount of dice being rolled. They're 2 of the things I would do. That's how would I know I've been going on a bit already. I would not be afraid of copying. I would. Oh my God, there's more. I would unashamedly copy a mixture of terrain rules from older editions and Bolt Action. I think I would bring cover saves back, meaning that ignores cover becomes much more relevant. I would have things like being able to go to ground and stuff like that. But if you go to ground, it limits what you can do in your next turn. So I would bring terrain back in a big way. I'd bring line of sight back. I'd have crunchier line of sight. I would keep the wounds that vehicles suffer, but I also would have the vehicle damage table so that weapons can get blown off and stuff like that. So I'd have much crunchier. These are all little things that little bits that I would change. So I'd be much crunchier on vehicle rules, much crunchier on terrain, reduce the amount of dice that are being rolled in the game, and it both like to generally reduce the amount and basically take rerolls out of the game as well. Templates, I think there's two ways you can do templates. You can either bring and I'd go back to 6x4. These are all little bits. I'd go back to 6x4 and I'd go back to 6 turns. Those are all little bits that almost deserve their own video themselves. But I feel like I've driveled on long enough. Yeah, I think that's how I would. I think cover. Oh, and I would bring back instant death. I don't mind the damage mechanic being a thing. There's two ways you could bring back instant death. You could have double strength versus toughness, or you could have double damage versus number of wounds. So if you are a 1 wound thing and you get hit by something that does 2 damage, you suffer instant death. Well, that doesn't really make sense because you'd only have 1 wound. So yeah, screw that. Maybe instant death. Maybe that would limit feel no pains. So maybe instant death doesn't insta-splat you. This is how I would consider it. I probably wouldn't bring back instant death where you're instantly splatted. I would have it where maybe damage influences feel no pain. You have, if you are a 1 wound model and you get hit by something which is damage to you, can't take a feel no pain by that. If you're a 2 wound model and you get hit by something which maybe just damage just higher than the number of wounds you have on your data sheet. So if you get hit by damage 2, you can take that. If you get hit by damage 3, no feel no pain against that. The damage is, so the reason why I think that's important is it doesn't have to be double. It just has to be, is the damage higher than the number of wounds you got? You don't get a feel no pain because it's so damaging that it doesn't care if you're feeling the pain or not. You're fucking, you're jibbed. Do you know what I mean? It does not, a battle cannon does not give one solitary shit that you do not feel pain. Congratulations. After it's hit you, you are very much not going to feel any pain, even if you are a space marine. That's how I would bring it back. So that way, damage can still do damage to multi-wound vehicles. Damage can still do damage. So you don't have to go back to vehicles being all or nothing. Vehicles can still be ground down, but on top of being ground down, they can still have weapons and stuff blown off and whatnot. And then you can also, so that still works, but then infantry can't just fucking tank a las cannon. Yeah. I think that would be kind of cool. That's how I would probably do it. Oh, and I'd have the maximum invulnerable save you could have be a 5-up, unless you are a particularly epic hero, and then I'd have a 4-up. You could make an exception for the Shadow Field for the Dark Elder, because that's been a 2-up, but it pops. Yeah, I think anything above a 5-up, should be limited. So if you want a 4% vulnerable save, fine, you can do that. But once it's failed once, it's out. I think that's there's lots of these are all little bits. All little bits, but all bits that I think, little tweaks here and there that I think could be changed. So we went into a lot of depth over the big stuff, and then we just sort of touched upon some of the lighter bits. I think cover saves are very important. Then we get to the AP system. If you have cover saves, does that mean you have the old AP system or the new AP system? It's a good question. I think you could have the new AP system where you reduce it. So, but a cover save could kick in. So let's say you're a space marine who's got a 3-up save. If you are hit by an AP -1 weapon, you have a 4-up save, so you just take your armor save. But if you are hit by an AP 3 weapon and you're in a forest, you can take a 5-up cover save. Unless the enemy has ignore cover, and then you would be on your 6-up armor save. So it represents that. I mean, maybe that's just changes for the sake of changes. But I feel that somewhat represents that. I feel like that is a better system because it can accommodate different kinds of cover. So, you know, light cover is just like a 6-up, but you know, medium cover is like a 4. It's like a 5-up, and heavy cover is like a 4-up. And last thing I would bring back would be initiative. I don't think, or I do not think that charging should mean you automatically go first. I think that if a guardsman charges a space marine, there is a very, very strong chance that the space marine is going to twat him, even if he charges first. I think initiative is an extremely valuable mechanic, and the removal of such a mechanic has, we have been dancing around how to solve it with things like fights first and counter-attack and all this kind of stuff. And I think the reality is, have initiative and then have bonuses to initiative for charging. So maybe if you are, again, steal it from Old World, you can get +3 you get +1 initiative for each inch that you charge, up to a maximum of 3 inches of initiative 3. So you can charge 6 inches, you still get +3. And then I would also, God, it keeps going, this list. What would I change? Initiative. I would also have like I said the combat thing from Old World. I'd also have movement plus 2d6, picking the highest, be your charge distance. I think you should have a set amount that you can charge, and then you can, I mean, I would just have fixed charge distances, because it works in fixed charge distances, fixed run distances, because less dice rolled in just to make things quicker. Your charge distance should be your movement plus your initiative, or you could have half movement plus initiative, I don't care, but your charge distance could be your movement plus initiative. So just like guardsman could charge 9 inches, you could, or maybe your charge could, there's ways you could manage it. I don't necessarily mind rolling dice, but for stuff like that, but I would not be against just having fixed charge distances. You could have fixed charge distances, and then those charge distances could get reduced based on like kind of terrain you're charging through. Is the enemy defending an obstacle? Has the enemy done Overwatch? Stuff like this. So you have fixed charge distances, but the charge number can be lowered. So you have ways, so you don't just have people like charging like 12 inches, but you have people charging 12 inches to buy action, and it's not a problem. Right, I think that's now I think that's everything. There's probably more, but even if I think of more, that's a lot of the ways that I would, that is my perfect 40k. I can't even remember everything I've talked about, but that's a lot of ways that I would change 40k to make it feel crunchier, and to, that's just how I would like to play it. That's how I'd like to play it. I'd probably, last thing, I don't think I'd have stratagems. I don't like stratagems. Too much prevalence for gotcha. No stratagems, no reactions. Let us all play honest Warhammer for a time. Maybe these things can come back in some capacity, but it does not make sense that one unit can throw grenades and another unit cannot. Either you have grenades or you don't. I want my mechanics to simulate a battle, not service arbitrary game mechanics. Yeah. Now, let me know what you think down in the comment section. There's a lot I would do. There's a lot I'd change. And I hope that you guys can see there's a lot I would change, but I haven't just gone back to 5th edition and said play that. I have actually acknowledged that there's things from there we want to take, things from Old World we want to take, there's things from Modern 40k we want to take. I've taken this, I've put it into a melting pot. This is not Old Hammer, this is New Hammer, but it's Mordian's New Hammer. Let me know what you think, boys. All right. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Redfield, 32, Jurgens, Miasma, Try Again, Bragg, RJ, Scorpion, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Nicholas Walsh, John Stubbs, Guardian, Varney, Sword, Fish Trombone, Picklock the Forged. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.